Night no longer arrived as a gentle visitor. It pressed across American cities like a warning, thick with tension not born from bullets or sirens, but from words broadcast from podiums and repeated on screens until truth sounded smaller than fear. The president had taken to describing the nation's cities as war zones. He spoke of violent crime exploding beyond control, of families trapped, of local governments failing their people. His voice carried authority, and his message was simple. Only the federal government could save them. But the story being lived on the ground did not match the one being told. In Washington, D.C., the numbers painted a different picture. Violent crime had dropped to lows unseen in nearly 3 decades. Neighborhoods once scarred by violence were healing. Parents let children play outside again. Corner stores stayed open earlier, and families walked home without looking over their shoulders. It was fragile progress, but real. Yet, within a single morning, all of it was dismissed when the president declared a crime emergency and ordered federal forces into the city. Residents awoke to the sound of engines rumbling down narrow streets. Military trucks and black SUVs formed convoys, rolling past brick row homes and playgrounds where children played just the day before. National Guard members stood at intersections, unfamiliar with the faces in the neighborhoods they now patrolled. Uniforms gathered around metro stations. Armed officers, flown in from across the country, walked sidewalks they had only seen on briefing maps. It felt less like help and more like takeover. People stood in doorways, squinting at the spectacle. Was something happening they hadn't heard about? Was there a threat no one had been warned of? Rumors spread, but the truth remained unchanged. Nothing catastrophic had occurred. No surge of violence. No crisis. Just a declaration of emergency born from claims that did not match the city's reality. A grandmother in Southeast D.C., who had lived through the real bloodshed of the 1990s, leaned on her porch railing, watching soldiers take positions on her block. She remembered when gunshots split the night with terrifying regularity, when ambulances came too late and too often. But now, she said quietly, her neighborhood was safer than it had been in years. She looked at the uniforms and whispered, "Why now? When we're finally breathing again." Fear began to seep in, not fear of criminals, but fear of authority. Routine became unfamiliar. The morning commute meant checkpoints. Young men walking to school were stopped, questioned, sometimes searched. People who once felt safe began avoiding their own sidewalks. A teacher in Northeast noticed fewer students staying after class for tutoring. Parents no longer wanted their kids walking home alone. Local police departments watched federal officers take over investigations, patrols, and neighborhoods they had spent years trying to rebuild trust within. Community programs focused on youth mentorship, mental health, and restorative justice found themselves sidelined. Their work was dismissed as naive, ineffective, too slow, too gentle. But these efforts had helped crime drop, something the federal narrative ignored completely. In a cluttered office lined with maps and printed charts, community organizer Jamal stared at data showing the steady decline of violent crime. He had spent years tracking these numbers. He held the graphs in trembling hands, unable to reconcile the truth before him with the emergency unfolding outside. How could the city be occupied under the claim of danger that did not exist? He printed reports, passed them to journalists, city council members, church leaders. Some read with concern, others with disbelief. But the reports didn't make it onto the nightly news. Fear made for better stories than facts. A town hall meeting gathered dozens of residents seeking answers. A mother stood, tears in her eyes, saying her children had been safer before the soldiers came. Now they were afraid to walk past armed men stationed near their school. A barber recounted being searched twice in 1 week without explanation. An elderly man said he felt like a stranger in the neighborhood he had lived in for 40 years. No one could point to the crime wave they'd been told to fear. What they feared now were the people sent to protect them. Television screens showed images of cities in chaos, looters, fires, gun battles. But locals recognized the truth. Much of that footage wasn't from their city at all. Some came from old protests, others from different states entirely. Clips were stitched into a narrative of collapse. On talk shows, commentators repeated the same lines. Cities were crumbling, leaders were failing, crime was rampant. Yet independent researchers showed crime was falling, not rising. Their findings were dismissed as partisan, biased, unreliable. The president called his critics liars. He said anyone who questioned the emergency was ignoring the suffering of innocent people. He claimed only his administration had the strength to fight the criminals who had supposedly overrun American streets. His words, repeated daily, blotted out the quieter truths spoken by the communities themselves. Legal scholars warned that what was happening set a dangerous precedent. If the president could declare an emergency based on false information and send in troops against the wishes of local leaders, then no city was safe from federal control. Mayors demanded evidence. None came, only cherry-picked incidents stretched into proof of widespread chaos. In the neighborhoods, emotional wounds deepened. A teenager described being stopped 3 times in the same week walking home from basketball practice. A young mother kept her children inside for fear they'd be mistaken for threats. A street mural meant to honor neighborhood heroes was painted over by soldiers who assumed it contained gang symbols. It didn't. It was a tribute. At night, people gathered in living rooms, whispering fears they dared not speak outside. They felt as though they had been cast as criminals in their own homes. Progress became invisible under the weight of a narrative that demanded they be broken so someone else could claim to fix them. Jamal organized a quiet demonstration in a public park. Hundreds arrived, holding candles that flickered like fragile hope. Parents, teenagers, elders, workers all stood together. They carried no weapons, only signs. We are not the enemy. Let us live. Truth matters. No arrests were made. No violence erupted. It was peaceful, solemn. A reporter asked Jamal what he hoped to achieve. He looked at the crowd, his voice soft but firm. We're not a crisis. We're a community. Stop calling us broken just to justify control. The federal presence eventually receded, but the harm lingered. Trust, the most precious currency between a community and its protectors, had been fractured. People wondered whether the truth could ever be loud enough again. The lie had been powerful, sweeping, and strategically told. It justified a takeover, and if it could happen once, it could happen again anywhere. The greatest threat had never been the crime statistics, which showed progress. The threat was the lie that turned safety into panic. A lie told loudly enough to overpower facts and lived experiences. A lie that made a city doubt itself. A lie that proved how easily fear could be manufactured to serve power. Even after the trucks left and the checkpoints vanished, the question remained, echoing through streets once watched by armed strangers. Who gets to decide what danger looks like? And what happens when fear becomes a tool, not to protect cities, but to control them? The truth was still there, quiet but unbroken. Crime had fallen. Communities were healing. The emergency had been manufactured, but in a world where narrative outweighed reality, truth needed voices brave enough to speak, even when no one wanted to listen. Because the next takeover might not need bullets or chaos. It might only need a story told loudly, repeated endlessly, until people believed it more than their own eyes.